Hello everybody. Hopefully second time around this will work. I can't believe I just spent 40 minutes talking to myself without result. Anyway, off we go. This is how I created a spinner card in Canvasworkspace. This is the downloaded version of Canvas, so I'm working from the laptop version. That does make a difference because some of the commands and places where commands are available in here are not the same as the online version, and I suspect that's to do with the mechanics behind it. However, as long as you're using the downloaded version, you will find the same buttons. The first thing I'm going to do is come across here to the right hand side to the artboard. I'm going to click on that. Now, currently I am working in millimeters and I switch. It depends what I feel like. Today I'm going to work in inches, and I'm also going to click under here on show the ruler. So I get the ruler across the top and down the side, and that's going to make my life easier in terms of trying to get things organized. So I'm going to click back to the edit button because that's where we're going to be most of the time, and across here on the left hand side I'm going to click on the shapes menu. Now just before I do, in theory the canvas mat is 12 by 12. However, if you look, you'll see that this red dotted line that comes down the side here and goes across and down actually cuts at about 11.56. So I'm going to make life easy for myself, and I'm going to make a card that is much smaller than that, simply to make life easy. So I'm going to click on the basic shapes, which is on the left hand here. The second one down is, if you hover over it, it'll say shapes. If you click on it, it'll pop it out. I'm going to use my mouse wheel to scroll down, and I'm going to select a rectangle. And when I do, it appears on the mat. Because I don't need this at the moment, I'm going to simply click on the button again, and that'll switch it off and it gives me a bigger area. I'm going to move it down. I'm actually going to move it down to the first inch line. My mat, if I go back to the artboard on the right hand side, you can see it shows inches, and down here at the bottom it says grid spacing 1 inch. So that's why it is what it is. Go back to the edit menu. At the moment it is 3.94 by 2.76, which is a perfectly reasonable height. However, it's not what I want. So the first thing I'm going to do is click off maintain aspect ratio. When it's blue and highlighted, it means it's switched on. If you click on it, it goes blank and it means it's switched off. I'm going to make my width 10 inches and I'm going to make my height 5. And if I click back on here, you can see that here I've got 10 inches by 5 inches. So that's the size I want. To make things a little easier to see on screen, I'm going to click it with a fill color and just turn it red or pink or whatever color that is. Now, I want to make a front and an inside, and that will become more obvious as we go along. So the first thing I need to do is decide where to kind of put this, and what I can do is, one of the things that you can do in Canvas is you can actually slide this across, and if I slide it across, in the center of the object you have the center nodes. There's one at the top, one in the middle, and one at the bottom. And to make life easier, I'm going to zoom in around this area here, and if I then go back to the select tool, click and drag, I'm going to line up my center node with the black line, and if I use the elevator key just to move it up, you can see that that black line equates to 0. So I now know that by lining the center nodes up on my black line, I've got 0 to 5 inches, and that just makes centering things easier. You can do this a lot of different ways. It's my particular particular way to find that this works. I think I missed it by a hair. Now, if you look over here on the position, my X under the edit, we're on the edit menu, you can see it says it's minus 4.98, which isn't quite accurate, so I'm going to make it minus 5 on the X key. Now that means it's exactly on that line. So I know that from this 0 to the 5 inches, that is exactly where I want it to be. I'm going to go back on the left-hand side to the Shapes menu, and I'm going to click on it to open it up. I'm using my mouse wheel to scroll down, but if you don't have a mouse wheel, you can click on here and drag. I happen to like using a mouse wheel. And I'm going to come down to click on Circle. Whenever you click on a shape, it will appear in the top left-hand corner of the mat. Because I don't want anything more at the moment, I'm going to click on the Shapes menu to switch it off. Gives me a bit more space. Now, this circle has come in handily at 3.94 by 3.94. I always often wonder who sets these sizes, but it is irrelevant because you can always change it. Because I do want to maintain it as a circle, I'm going to click on Maintain Aspect Ratio. And in this case, because I know this is 5 wide, I'm going to say I want this to be 3. So I'm going to click on 3 in the first box, press the return key, and now I've got 3. So how do we center it? Well, because we know it's 3, and we know that this from this line here, the naught, it goes to 5. We want to center this, and one of the reasons the ruler is switched on is to make it life easier for me, across at 2.5. And again, I'm almost dead on, but again, if you look at the X, you can see, well, if it's 5 and it's 3, there's actually should be an inch either side of it, so I'm going to click on here in the edit, and I'm going to say, right, I want that to be at point X1 on the X. And the X is your left to right. And then I'm going to use the arrow key on my keyboard to move it down. And again, because we know that if we look at this, we know that it is, let me just click on this one. We know the width is 10, but the height is 5. Again, if we want to use the ruler key, what we need to do is to move this up and click on the X key and make it minus 5, and click on the Y key and make it 0. Again, we're very much there. So we click on this circle. I'm just going to click on it and change shape so you can see it more clearly. So again, we know that if this is on minus 5 and this one is on 1, 3 from 5 is 2, so it ought to be right. And again, 5, if we click on 1, we've actually got it perfectly centered. And you can do it with any size. I mean, it's obviously easier if you pick, like I have, sizes that work. So now we have the circle in front and the front of the card behind. What I can click now is click and drag, and I'm going to use my mouse key over the edit menu, which is down here, and I'm going to click on, just remembered I need something better. Before I do that, I'm going to click on this, go Control C on my keyboard, or you can right click and click on copy, click away from it, and either Control V and or if you want to just click on paste and you'll get one. I only need one of these, so I'm just going to delete the second one. I like moving them off the mat. So going back to what I was thinking, we need to then click on the two, or select the two by clicking and dragging, come over to the edit menu way down to the bottom here and click on subtract. What we've done is punched a hole in the card. So that's the front of my card. I'm now going to click on it and say right click and then say duplicate. And because I want this to be the inside of the card, I'm actually going to use my mouse key, scroll up, and I'm going to go under the transform menu and say flip horizontal and change it to, I don't know, yellow for fun. So now this is the front of my card, this is the inside of my card, and we're a long way along. At this point, it's a really good idea to save your work. So let's go to File, up here on the left, Save, and I'm going to call it Happy Birthday. You can see I've been playing with this already, Happy Birthday 3, because that's the latest one I've been done. Right, now it will perhaps take a few minutes. As we go along and it gets more complicated, you'll find it takes longer to save, but just let it do its thing and it will. If you go back to the display menu up here on the left and zoom to all objects on map, you think it would only actually cover the map, but it doesn't. It actually covers every object you've created, which is incredibly useful, really. So we have the front of our card, we have the inside of our card, and we need both. And the reason I flipped it is so that when it cuts out, I know that this card needs to be the top that I want. If I want a pattern or something, I want it to be facing me. So when I cut it, it cuts out the right way. So when I stick them together, this will go inside that and it'll work perfectly. Next thing, how do we create some sort of rim around this particular cutout? This is our circle, it's the one we used, and the reason I duplicated it is because I'm going to use this to create that perimeter. You can see it's still over here on the edit menu, 3 by 3, and that's the size we started it. Over on the left, I'm going to go back to the shapes menu. I'm all for using shapes we already have. And here under the circle menu, and if you're at the top, you just need to scroll down. As I said, you can either use a mouse or you can click and drag on this elevator or lift. I don't know what they call it really. And I'm going to click on this particular shape because I like the kind of curves. Again, go across the left, click off shapes, and it gives you more space. I'm going to change color again because I think it's easier to see what I'm up to. And click and drag across. Now I'm going to click and drag so I've got them both there and say align top and align middle. But clearly I can't see the circle I started with, so let's click on this and say right click, arrange, send to back. So now you can see I've got the circle and I've got the curly shape. I really don't know what this is called. I must find out sometime. Anyway, so what we can do is we can click and drag, and again we're going to scroll down under the process overlap menu and click on subtract, and we're creating a frame. Now because the original circle was the right size, if we move it across, you should find that actually it sits quite perfectly over that circle. Now it's up to you. I happen to want one inside and outside, so I've got one there. I'm going to right click on it and say duplicate, and now I've got one for the outside and one for the inside. It's always a good idea to save your work, and while I clicked off the video for a second, that's what I did. If you click on File and Save, I've just saved it so it's not saying anything. Sometimes you'll find nothing much will happen, but up at the top here it might say not responding, and I'll try and remember to show you that again in a minute. So now is a good time to get organised. We saved it, so that's good. Let's just go across here on the right hand side to the layers palette, which is this one, and time to just sort of sort what out we're doing. The pink one is our front, so let's click on that and we're going to type on front. The yellow one, which if I click on once and then I click on again, is the inside of my card. So now we have our front and we have our inside. We have these two shapes which are our toppers, so since I'm going to cut them both with the same material, let's just bring them down vaguely side by side. Hold the shift key down, select, let's just start again, click on one, hold the shift key down, click on the other, and then I'm going to go back to the edit menu for a second and say align the middles. I am then going to come across, right click and say group. Go back to layers palette and now I've got a group of the two shapes. Again, if I click on group once, click on it again, I can now say these are my toppers. And it helps enormously when you're doing things to keep things organised. So if you're ever having difficulty selecting something, it's always worth remembering you can come down to the layers palette on the right hand side here and select what you want. Because this is a group and there are two shapes, you have a downward pointing triangle. If you click on it, you'll see that you just see the word toppers, but toppers selects both of them, the inside of the card, the front of the card. Now, one of the things that in order to make a spinner, we need to have something that goes inside this circle. If you remember, our original circle was 3 inches. So let's go back over on the left hand side here to the shapes, click on shape and click on circle. If you've been there, it'll remember where you are. I don't need anything else at the moment, so I'm going to go back to the shapes and switch it off. It just gives you more room to work. I'm going to turn this green, and hopefully that'll make it able to see. Now if we just use this shape, what you found is if you put it over the topper, and that's interesting, it's the wrong shape, it's the wrong size of course. Let's just go back to the edit menu and it comes in at 3.94. Now who decided you want a 3.94 circle? Who knows? Anyway, the fact is I don't. But the original circle I was using is 3, so if I highlight that, select 3, press the return key, if I move it across you'll see that it fits perfectly over the top. However, because we want it to be a spinner, we want to have a bit of a gap on each side. So I think what we're going to do instead is highlight the 3 and click on 2.50. You don't really need the 0, it's just a habit of mine typing things in. And if I now bring that across, you can see there is quite a lot of space for it to spin. So that's good. You've got about 1/4 of an inch either side, and top and bottom. Now we need the text. You can make a spinner any shape you want. However, if you want it to look the same when it flips, you need to have the same basic shape. I'm going to use a circle. I'm going to use writing on the back and the front. And you can have different writing. It doesn't have to be the same. It's entirely up to you. This is where your own design thought process comes in. However, I'm going to use, for simplicity, the same words on the back and on the front. So I'm going to click away from it and I'm going to come across the left hand side and click on text. Now if you click on the text font, you'll see at the top is recently used fonts and then Canvasworkspace fonts. If, like me, you use the scroll key on your mouse, you can scroll down, eventually it'll say all fonts. And you can use any font you've got installed on your computer. However, what I want to do is pick a font that I think most people have, and that is Arial. So it's Arial Regular. I think most people will have that on their computer. So in order to make it work, you come to the mat and click on the mat, and you'll see a box appears, and you can type in happy. Click anywhere on the mat and it becomes an object. Click back on the text button and let's type in birthday. Whoops, birthday. Click on the text on the mat. Click back on the text button again on the mat, and one of my granddaughters is called Olivia, and it happens to be her birthday next week, which is what started this whole thing off. I'm going to click on the mat, and I'm going to click and drag and come across to the edit menu and align everything vertically center. Now I do have a habit, because I'm so used to aligning centrally and vertically, sometimes I also click on horizontally, and of course that is really not what you want. Luckily you have always in the top left here the undo button, a great help. So what you can do is click and drag them. Underneath the align menu on the right hand side here, right and left, it's getting late so I think I get confused sometimes. You can click on distribute items and that will simply make them equidistant. However, underneath it there's even more fun thing, which is called distribute space. And you can say distribute them at 3 inches and press the return key and nothing happens, which is a bit disappointing. However, you need to activate it once you've changed this. So come across, click on vertical distribution, and it will spread them at 3. And that's terrific if that's what you want. However, I want them quite close together because this is a very small circle. So I'm going to put 0.1, 0. Now, I don't know that you actually need the 0, it's kind of a habit, but anyway, having put it in, I'm going to come across and click on the vertically distribute space. And all of a sudden, they're punched up quite close together, which is nice. I'm now going to right-click on them and say group. So I've now got a group, and to make life easier to spot, I'm going to change it to red, which happens to be my granddaughter's favourite colour. And while I remember, I'm going to come up to the operation button and I say I want to draw this. I don't want to cut it, I want to draw it. So let's move this over here, and I'm going to come up to the zoom magnifying glass and just zoom in a bit so I can see it. Clearly this is too big, so let's go back to the select button, select both, and you can see it's way too big. Click away from it to deselect everything, click back on the text, and let's click and drag. Now, one of the things you can do, of course, is if I just move that across the side and click on the circle, come back up here, you can see it's 2.5 wide. So what you could say is, okay, let's click on the text. It's currently 3.59. Let's make it 2.5 and see what happens. So if I select them both again, say align vertically, align horizontally, it's still a bit too big. So again, let's just say, let's make it 2.25 by clicking, all I did was click on the size width down arrow, align it centrally and vertically, and actually that fits very nicely. So we've now got one, and let's make it a group. So I've clicked and dragged both of them. So I've got them both selected, right click and say group. Now if you don't like right clicking, or you can use Control G plus Shift G to ungroup them. I tend to right click, it's just because I'm used to using my mouse. I'm going to select it and I'm going, click on it, go into the layers palette. And what I appear to have is 2 groups here, because I group the text and then I group the shape. I don't really want 2 groups, it gets far too confusing. So I'm going to right click on the top one and say ungroup. I'm going to right click on the second one and say ungroup. Then I'm going to click and drag on all of them so that on the layers palette you can see all 4 pieces are selected now, and I'm going to right click and say group. Now I have one group. However, what I want you to notice in the layers palette is this, the text is set to draw, text is set to draw, text is set to draw, but the shape is set to cut. Doesn't matter about it in a group as long as they're individually set. So I'm going to click on here and I'm going to say this is HB1, and I actually want 2 of them. So all I'm going to do is right click again and say duplicate, and now I've got 2. Again, I'm just going to align them, go back to the edit menu, and let's align center. So we've got those 2 aligned. Go back to display, zoom to all objects on matte, and now I've got my toppers or spinners. Let's get this correct. These are my spinners. This is the front of my card. This is the inside of my card. These are my 2 toppers for the front and the inside, and you could stop there. However, I decided that I'd quite like to have something behind the spinner, so when as it spun there was something to see, and therefore I thought, what can I do? I remember my granddaughter loves butterflies, so I went to the canvas project up the top here on the left hand side, clicked on it, and it comes up with a whole list of stuff, and I clicked in the search button and I typed in butterfly, and 3 came up. I decided that what I wanted to do was use one with a back and a front, and having checked them out, this butterfly and flower initial board does. It's quite a pretty project, by the way, and the flowers are very nice, so you could use it. So what I needed was the back. If you click on it, it will plonk it on the board, and then you click on the front and it'll plonk it on the board, and then you come up to the X and just close it. So here you can look. Of the 3 butterflies, I think I like the top one. I like the shape. So all I'm going to do is click and drag on the bottom ones and then hit the delete key on my keyboard. Here I'm going to click and drag so you can see there are 2 boxes, which means they're both selected, and here it is a good point to center vertically and horizontally. Now what I want them to do is I want them to fit inside here. Whatever you bring in last is at the front. So I know that this circle is 3 inches. So I know that this has to be smaller than 3 inches. So what I'm going to do is make it, let's say, 2.75. Let's see how that looks. Whoops. And if you don't type it incorrectly, you get 275 inches, which is really not what we want. So let's type in 2. Make sure I put the point in. 7.5. Aha, that looks so much better. It's amazing what you can do without really thinking about it. Let's just click and drag and take a look. It's still a bit too big, so bring it back again and let's make it 2.4. See what happens. Now that will, I think, sit pretty nicely behind, so that when the spinner spins you can see the butterfly. Again, I'm going to click on the top one and pull it out, click and drag through both of them, align them through the center here, and then I am going to group them. Go back to the layers palette, and you can see here that actually the butterflies are made up of the shape, which is the outside, and then these lines, which are cut lines to enable it to fold. So that's fine. I'm going to the top layer, click once, click twice, and I'm called it butterfly. I'm going to click on this downward pointing arrow, and you can see we're all organized now. That's my butterfly. That is one of my happy birthdays. That's the second one. Here are my toppers. Here's the inside and here's the front. So I'm now going to move it all back onto the workspace. So I'm going to move the front one over here, the inside one over here. Oops, whoopsie-daisies. The toppers somewhere in the middle. And then my happy birthdays. I'm going to click on one, hold the shift key down, click on the other, and let's just move those down here. Let's click on File and Save so we don't lose the work. If you see at the top here it says not responding, it simply means it's taking time to save it. Depends on what you're doing and what computer resources you have. Just leave it alone and eventually it'll disappear and your work is saved. Now, the next thing about this is sending it to cut. Again, I'm going to, this one is triangles pointing downwards. I'm going to click on it, click on it, click on them so I can just see them. I do not send the file across to cut like this. It's just too confusing when it gets to the machine. So what I would probably do first is I would hide all those things I didn't want to cut. So I would hide the butterfly by switching it off on the eye, hide the two happy birthdays, I would hide the toppers. Now because they happen to fit, I could cut my inside and my outside quite easily if they're made of the same thickness. If you're using different thicknesses, it's better to cut them separately if you are using an auto blade, because you need different pressures. If they're the same thickness, you can cut them at the same time. So having just got these two selected, I would go to File, Export or Transfer the FCM file. It says these objects that have been set hidden are not available, and that is perfect because I don't want them to go. I just want these two things to go. So if I say OK, with mine I can click on Transfer FCM file via the internet, or you can export it to a USB, or you can transfer it to by cable. I can transfer it by the internet, so I click on that and it says OK, I've done that. Obviously then I would load my machine and cut it. Once I've done that, I would switch these two off. Now I might cut the toppers, and depending on what I want to do, I might cut the butterflies again. Because you can move these around the mat, you can say, well, actually I want to cut these and I want to cut those and send those. Again, once you've sent them, then I would send these, and again remember what they will do is the text will set to draw, but the shape is set to cut. So again, I would send these separately. If I put all the eyes back on, you can see it all. If you're doing something like this and you don't want to mess anything up, what you can also do is you can hit the lock button. Now even if they're visible, you can't get hold of them. You just literally can't. But I always tend to find I switch them off, and that way it doesn't confuse things. But you can lock things so that they can't be altered. I'd love to see anything you create. I have one that I've posted and I'll try and take a better picture to go with this. I hope you find this helpful, and if you have any queries, please post a comment below. I'd love to hear how you get on, and I'd love to see your pictures. Thanks very much for listening.